How we doing, folks? My name is Dan Lyman. I'm here with citizensfortrump.com, Western Free Press, and my own outlet, citizenanalyst.net. I'm sitting down with John Patrick Acquaviva, a former Venezuelan soccer star now living in London, a big supporter of Donald Trump, and also a political activist in his own right. And so the reason that we're sitting down is I found out about John about a month ago. My editor passed me a video that John had made. It was about 27, 28 minutes long. It was a video of speeches and presentations and talks from Donald Trump from 1980 all the way through the year 2015. It really documented a pretty incredible dedication to the America First message that Donald has been putting forth. And at the time, the video had about 2,500 views. My editor wanted me to do a piece on it and to get the video out and expose it some more. In the last 3 weeks, it's had well over 200,000 views. I think we're doing about 5 to 10 to 15,000 views a day, if I'm not mistaken, John, on your video. And so now John is in the spotlight with as a Donald Trump supporter and his outreach to the youth and the Hispanic community. So we're going to let John introduce himself and tell us a little more about your journey, John.
Well, hi Dan, thanks for that intro and thanks for having this interview. I started off as a footballer, moved into a sport called freestyle football or freestyle soccer, in which you basically do tricks with the football. That was after injuring my knee and pretty much having to quit football due to it. I spent about 6 years doing freestyle as a full-time job. I got to travel the world, do a lot of amazing things, be sponsored by some of the top brands. After that, I injured my back after getting the chance to carry the Olympic torch for the London 2012 Olympics. I injured my back, which caused me to have to quit freestyle, and it kind of pushed me into what I'm currently doing, which is marketing and development. I have my own company here in England. And besides that, I've also been a keen political activist for the past 4 years, starting off just talking about my own country, Venezuela. Obviously, there's an endless amount of things you can talk about in the political spectrum in terms of Venezuelan politics. My first public appearance as a political activist was about 4 years ago. I made this 15-minute long YouTube video speaking about the soon-to-be elections in Venezuela at that time and showing my support for the opposition leader. And it ended up getting spread around by national media in Venezuela, and it made me pretty much enemy number one for about a month in Venezuela for the opposition, for the government, and for the followers of the Chavismo in Venezuela. So much so that I got completely blasted on TV in Venezuela by some of the top outlets of government support. They called me all sorts. They said that I'd taken money from the government, which was completely false. Never had any connection to the government because of the political views I've always had, which have been against socialism, against what the government in Venezuela was doing. They completely tried to stain my name. So I've been in the receiving end of people trying to make lies about you in the public spectrum and trying to misrepresent what you're about and what you're saying. So that was one of the main things that led me to now support Donald Trump, because I can see past all the lies that are told about him.
Amazing. You've said in one of your statements, the American people need to realize that Donald J. Trump is our last hope. He is the only person who is capable of saving America and the Western world as a whole. Tell us about how you first learned of Donald Trump, the person, and then when you came to realize the truth of that statement to you, when you really felt like Donald Trump is the great hope in the realm of politics and generally to save Western culture.
Well, I've pretty much always known about Donald Trump, who he is. I've seen The Apprentice when I was smaller, and I always knew who he was in terms of a public figure, in terms of a businessman. I never knew what his political ideas or viewpoints were up until really recently when he started running for presidency. But the way that I found out about him was actually because I received quite a lot of messages from people who follow me in Latin America, who sent me his initial speech when he first threw his hat in the ring, and he gave that infamous quote about Mexican immigration. Everyone in Latin America was pretty much in an uproar about it, just pretty much claimed it was the worst thing any public figure had ever said in the history of time. They sent it to me over and over again, asked me to give my opinions on it. So I listened to the speech, and after listening to it, I could not understand what was so controversial about it. I could not understand why were people so mad about it. All I saw was a really well-made speech, well thought out, that said basically one of the biggest truths of one of the biggest problems that is currently facing not only America but the West as a whole, which is illegal immigration, and he said it with stats to back him up. So where was the rage about him in some way claiming that all Latins were murderers and criminals? It's just completely ridiculous. But it just goes to show how people can completely take out of context what you've said and just lie about what you've said, plain and simple.
And you've mentioned that some of that message, the initial messaging and everything since, really gets distorted through the translation gets affected, and the people that are translating it have their own agenda. The Jorge Ramoses of the Hispanic media. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you think that what's going on in America for the English viewership is bad, then you should see how they've tried to make Donald Trump sound in Latin America by translating what he says. So what happens is that you take a 30-second soundbite out of one of his speeches, and then you give it to someone who has their own agenda to push, which tends to be towards the left and tends to be socialism and globalism, especially in Latin America, where most of the countries are socialist. So you give it to someone like that, a journalist like that, and even if the journalist himself may hold viewpoints that go in agreement with what Donald Trump is saying, obviously he has to toe the line of whoever is employing him. So what the result is just, I mean, it's such a bad job, a poor job at translating what he said that it's actually just funny. You just have to look at it and laugh. And the fact that people can't see past that and go and search deeper for the actual thing that he said and just take it at face value. That when Jorge Ramos says that yes, he was indeed talking about that he hates all Latin Americans and that's the truth, that just goes to show the poor state of especially millennials, especially people my age currently, that they can't be bothered with doing any research for themselves. They'll just take at face value whatever they see as a headline on a news outlet or whatever one of their favorite celebrities tweets out when they say that Donald Trump is evil and he hates everyone.
Definitely the power of culture and social media and the way that the news is spun and delivered to the youth right now is it's dangerous because they don't get the full perspective. You have kids getting their news off people like the Fat Jewish on Instagram. They're getting their news from those kind of people, and it's
Yeah.
really it's toxic. So being young yourself, being Hispanic, two demographics that don't necessarily play so well for Donald Trump, although he is setting a new standard for Republicans, whereas in the past they would have had even less support than he does. He's actually generating a pretty good amount of support in comparison in these demographics, but there's a long ways to go. The importance of young, iconic cultural figures in spreading the message of Donald Trump is well, it's well established at this point. You being one of those people, what would you say to young and or Hispanic potential voters about the importance of Trump and the importance of his messaging and what he's really all about?
Well, Donald Trump goes further than just being a politician. He's more than just the next president for 1 or 2 terms. It's a lot deeper than that. What you have to look at currently is which are some of the biggest problems that are facing the Western world. And you have things like the economy, you have things like illegal immigration, you have things like Islam. And when you look at who are the people who are speaking out against these things, who are the people who are willing to actually go against what is currently this PC state, these social justice warriors are being offended at absolutely everything. And you see that there are not many. There are not many people who are willing to take a stand for what they believe is right and for what they believe has to be done in order to bring back some sense of equality of life, some sense of a nationalistic feeling of being proud of where you're from. And this is something that in the political spectre of America, I personally haven't seen in decades anyone have anywhere near the courage that Donald Trump has had. So to see something like that in America is really refreshing. And then to see that he is climbing the polls now, a lot of polls show him actually beating Hillary, which I do believe would happen if everything were fair and just in the elections. I think he would win in a landslide. But what you have to think is, what is the alternative to defending your borders, to defending your jobs, and to telling people that if they're going to come into your country, they have to assimilate, they have to respect your laws, they have to respect your freedoms, and they have to do things that are going to promote an improvement in the quality of life and in the society of the country to where they're going, which is not what you're seeing from most of these immigrants that are now coming into Europe, for example. You see millions of unassimilated immigrants that are coming in from war-ridden countries with the phrase that they're supposed to be refugees when the majority of them, as anyone with half a brain knows, is completely just economic migrants. They're trying to go and take advantage of the welfare state that's being set up in Europe. That's why they're risking their lives of traveling halfway across the world to go to a European country, because they've been promised housing, they've been promised money, they've been promised to be treated like they could never be treated in the country that they're coming from. If there were none of that promises, if there was no welfare state, then you wouldn't see even 10% of the current immigration that is coming towards Europe. It's exactly the same with America. It's because of the welfare state that people, for example, from Mexico want to leave Mexico, even though Mexico isn't half as bad as it's made to look. It's just about the media trying to portray Mexico as being this desolate kind of patch of land in which everyone is shooting everyone, and the cartels are completely taking over the country, and they're just killing people by the millions, which is really far from the truth. It's the same that we saw in Colombia. For decades and decades, Colombia was portrayed as a hellhole because of the problems with the guerrillas and the problems with the drug dealings. While it was true that Colombia had all these problems, the reality was that they never seemed to affect the population as a whole unless you had in some way some kind of involvement with, for example, the drug trade. So if you were someone that was really high up in the economic standard, then yes, you could maybe be at risk of being kidnapped. If you were someone involved with political ties, then yes, you could be at risk of being hurt or kidnapped in any way. But besides that, if you were just a normal person trying to make a living in Colombia, Colombia has had for the past few decades a really good quality of life. I know this because I lived in Colombia for 3 years. If you compare it to most of the countries in Latin America, the standard of living and the economy in Colombia is far superior to most of them. At the moment, you've got countries like Chile, because of the free market laws and the trade deals that have been implemented, they managed to take their economy out of a complete hellhole in which it was, something that most economists didn't even think it would be possible in 2 or 3 generations. They managed to do it in less than 20 years. Due to the same kind of laws and the same kind of free trade agreements that Donald Trump wants to implement. So it's just a matter of looking what's happening around you. Don't just be focused on what you think is happening. Actually go outside of your own country, outside of your own city, and look at what's happening around the world. Look at what socialism has brought, look at what globalism has brought, and on the other side, look at what capitalism and free market and good trade deals and having a strong leader who's going to make his country be respected as both two countries.
Absolutely. The common thread that runs through many of these countries that are in maybe not quite as failed as Venezuela, but are in varying degrees of decay. The common thread is socialism and in many cases globalism as well. But Venezuela is a special case, and you can speak to that very well. And you know that is really the rock bottom of when socialism truly sinks its fangs into every facet of life. And we have Donald Trump on the one side, we have Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton on the other side. Bernie Sanders is a self-professed socialist. Many indicators show that he's most likely a Marxist, a communist. He's hiding behind something that sounds a little cuter, democratic socialism. Hillary Clinton is her own flavor of that same statist, authoritarian mindset, that ideology. Speak a little bit as to the youth of America who, if I'm not mistaken, the statistics show that roughly 50% of millennials would prefer socialism. Speak to them and tell them just how dangerous socialism is, especially when it really goes into full effect.
Okay, this is the problem with socialism. When you live in a real world, you can't have utopic values. So utopic values call for example, if you have a welfare state, the idea of a welfare state is that you're supposed to be helping people to get on their own feet and then be able to provide for themselves and accomplish some success in their life. The truth is that there's many, many, many people who just milk the system, because when a system is put in place to give out handouts, to give out free money, to give out free housing, of course you're going to have a big percentage of people that are just going to take advantage of that. They're not going to be legitimate people who are actually trying to further their lives and just going to be on welfare as long as it takes to be able to get to the next point in their life in which they can separate ties with the government. Instead, they're just going to milk the system. It happens in England, it happens in America, it happens everywhere where a welfare state has been set up. And that is something that can't be avoided. Besides that, people need to understand that the concept of socialism, in which everyone is equal and as such they deserve to have an equal economic status and equal opportunities in every sense of the way, that is utopic. And what happens is the socialist leaders go into a country by making these promises that everything's going to be sorted out. So they take the responsibility away from the individual and they put it in the hands of the government. That creates a state of dependence in which you have people who are living in socialistic countries that are maintained in a level of poverty because it is in the best interest of the people who are in power. Because people who are going to vote socialist tend to be people of lower resources, tend to be poor people. They tend to be the biggest numbers that vote for leftists, for socialist leaders, because these socialist leaders are the ones that promise them the most. So when you take away the responsibility that each individual has to go out and make a life for themselves and provide for themselves and for their families, you create, as I said, a state of dependence, which ends up being toxic because it's pretty much the same as brainwashing someone into believing that without the politician who is now in charge and promising all these things, you wouldn't be able to have any modicum of a quality of life, which is complete and utter false. So you look at Venezuela. Venezuela, when Chavez came into power, it suffered. It had one of the biggest, if not the biggest, economic booms that it's ever had in its history due to the sale of petrol, generated well over $1 trillion in profit. Out of that, how much was invested into actually doing things for the country? For example, building up the education system in terms of having places that were fit for purpose, not to talk about hospitals. If you look at some of the pictures of hospitals in Venezuela, you'll think that it's out of a horror movie. And that's what happens. You have people who make promises, they get into power, they continue to make promises, and as the time passes by and the brainwashing has had more effect, these promises start fading away, but the dependence maintains. So what they do is they take all the money for themselves, they keep the people in poverty because that was their goal all along, and then the end result of socialism is always something like Venezuela. Always. You leave socialism long enough in a country and it's going to end up being like Venezuela. So people say, oh yeah, but what happened in Venezuela could never happen in America. And it's lies. That's how it happens. Do you think that 20 years ago, Venezuelan people ever imagined it was going to get this bad? Do you think that 20 years ago, Venezuelan people thought that they would have to go out on the street to hunt down cats and dogs and pigeons in the squares to try and provide food for their family? Of course not. We're in the country, well, I'm from the country that has the biggest oil reserves in the world. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, people would have never imagined it could have ever got this bad. But it did, and it will. Anywhere where socialism is left long enough, Venezuela is the end point for it. So when you look at that, and when you look at historically what socialism has caused, which has been dictatorships and communism, which have both led to suffering and death of millions of people all over the world, how can you want something similar for your country?
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, the stories coming out of Venezuela are incredible. The videos that do make it out are there. Every Bernie Sanders supporter should have to watch all of them to understand what the cancer of socialism produces. So in closing here, tell us about what Donald Trump means to you. Who is he to you? How would you describe him to someone who's never heard of Donald Trump? Why do you support Donald Trump? If you had to tell a guy off the street who's never even heard his name, what would you say in a brief description?
What I will say is, if you're living in a country, whether it's America, whether it's England, any country in which you're living, you would like to think that the leader, the person who's calling the shots for most of the things that are going to affect your quality of life, truly and honestly has your best interest at heart. That's what you would want to think. Donald Trump is that person. Donald Trump is someone who has the best interest of the American people at heart. He wants what's best for the American people. He's someone who loves America, unlike Hillary Clinton, who is one of the most dishonest and corrupt politicians of all times. And she will say absolutely anything to get into power. And then, of course, she'll just be Obama 2.0. And we all know what happened in the past 8 years. So if you want someone who is actually willing to stand up against sometimes popular opinion due to how good the media machine and the establishment is at promoting these socialist and globalist ideas. If you want someone who's willing to go against that, if you want someone who's willing to take a stand for you and for what's right for your country, then look at Donald Trump and look at who is like Donald Trump in your country. For example, I'm in England, and in England we have people like Tommy Robinson, we have people like political leaders like Nigel Farage that are doing the same kind of thing. They're standing up against the establishment, against the system, and they're speaking the truth, and they want what's best for their country. So even if you're not American, you can stand with Donald Trump, because at the end of the day, what happens in America affects the rest of the Western world, which is why I said in my initial statement that you read out that Donald Trump is, as I see it, one of the last hopes, not just for America, but for the entire West.
He has said that we will no longer bow to the false song of globalism, one of the most powerful statements he's made on the campaign trail this year. Totally agree with everything you're saying. Well, anyways, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us today. I hope it's just the first of many opportunities to speak with you and hear what you have to say. You have so much great insight and a lot of experience. So where can people find you on the internet?
If you're looking for my English stuff, you can find me on Twitter on I am too skilled with an numerical two. Don't judge me on that Twitter handle. I made it when I was 17. If you're looking for Spanish content, then it's on Twitter at JPAFS. And for everything else on Facebook, you can find me with John Patrick Equaviva, my fan page.
Okay, thank you, John Patrick. My name is Dan Lyman again. You can find me on Twitter at Citizen Analyst or on Facebook at Citizen Analyst. And you can find my work at westernfreepress.com and citizensfortrump.com. Thanks for watching.